Welcome to Something for the Turbo, the new weekly podcast brought to you by Unfound, the global platform for the travel-loving cyclist.
Welcome to the show. Firstly, apologies for the slight delay in getting this one out to you. We had a lockdown, homeschooling, computer, glass of water incident at Unfound HQ, but we're back online now and we'll have 2 episodes for you this week. Today, I'm joined by Chris McNamara. Chris is a very experienced racer, having raced for over 26 years. He's held an elite license in the UK since its inception. He's represented Team GB, but he's also a very well-known and very well-respected cycling coach working for trainSharp. He's coached an array of riders up to World Tour level, and today he joins me to discuss all these topics and a lot more. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Chris McNamara.
Chris, thank you very much for joining me. How are you getting on?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, dealing with the lockdown like everyone else, but getting there, getting through.
Yeah, crazy times, isn't it? I did a full introduction before you came online, but be good for you to sort of tell us a little bit more about your background as a racer prior to getting into coaching, and when did you start cycling? How did you get into the sport?
Well, I'm not from a cycling family. I'm a twin, but I started cycling in 1988, and me and my brother bunked off school one day and went to the video shop and hired a film called American Flyers. Probably no one's really heard of, but it was about a cycle race in America, and it really fired our imagination. So we went down to the local cycling club, found out about the local cycling club in Halfords, I think, and then went down there one night and just gradually we were really into football at the time, and then got more and more into cycling to the point we packed up football. And I took up cycling more because I played football from a young age, like under 7s or something, and it was the classic like really pushy parents and what have you. And I wanted to do something that non-competitive, and I just enjoyed riding my bike and riding with other people. So yeah, that's how we got into it.
Given how pushy cycling has become today,
yeah,
it's gone role reversal almost, hasn't it?
Absolute role reversal, yeah. And we were very fortunate that we were schoolboys, and we had this great coach in the Worthing Excelsior called Paul West, who went on to work with BC, and he was amazing. He took us all over the country doing random schoolboy races in sort of caravan parks and car park crits and what have you. But yeah, it was fantastic times.
Amazing. So obviously you started in 88. I think that was the perfect time to catch the wave, really, with Boardman winning in 92, and cycling sort of slowly grew from there, really, didn't it? In terms of, did you see that? Did you feel that you guys were growing with cycling? The racing scene was growing domestically. There was more interest in cycling internationally as well.
I think at that time, especially say because I was at school, it was still like a real minority sport, and the governing body and the funding and everything. I mean, it's chalk and cheese to what it's like now. But then again, there was lots of opportunities because of that. So maybe the talent pool wasn't quite so deep, so you got selected for trips and the Centre of Excellence and what have you, and able to go on all these amazing trips, probably because there were less good riders around, I guess.
That's true, actually. When did National Lottery come in? I think it was around 96-ish.
Maybe a bit before that, I think. Wasn't it for to fund the bid for the Commonwealth Olympics? Yeah, maybe about 92, I think.
Yeah, okay. And obviously that's when we started to see a little bit more money coming into the sport.
Yeah.
And we were just talking offline before we started recording, just in terms of that was really sort of on the cusp of the generation before sort of Brits really made an impact internationally into cycling as well. Be keen to get your sort of view in terms of, you know, what were the sort of major hurdles for a young up and coming British cyclist in terms of trying to make it abroad? And was it a structure thing, a cultural thing, a psychological thing, a bit of everything? Was it the drug scene at the time? What are your views on that?
I think it was a bit of everything. I mean, the riders who were successful, say from my generation and maybe just after my generation, were all mega talents who had that sort of will and desire, who just to go to France, to go to Belgium, pack up your suitcase and just go and do it on your own without any support.
Yeah.
You've got massive admiration for those riders. So like Roger Hammond, just up routes, go to Belgium, ride the Comès Senior and really put yourself in it. But there wasn't that structure in place of like a pathway from say like schoolboy to junior to senior where there's an organised route. And those guys were just impressed the teams they rode for and just climbed the ranks that way. And that's the thing I think that's really changed in the sport now with when the funding started to come in and there were clear routes. So like the development programs and what have you. So and the riders then started to you could really see it that the riders were getting results, and then they would believe that they were competitive. Whereas I think maybe the generation I started with, and especially the generation before that, the racing then maybe you don't want to bring up doping too much, but there had been a doping problem throughout the sport, and it's something we used to see when we used to go and ride the Comesses in Belgium, and the guy taking us, John Barkley, who's a real legend in the sport, would say certain riders might have tested positive in France a few weeks before, yet they were still racing the races we were doing, and they were just crazy fast. crazy fast. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think the success of the Brits, this is in my opinion personally, is that of a number of things, the funding is probably the biggest factor, but also I do really believe that racing really cleaned up, and that enabled this whole generation to be that bit more competitive, or a lot more competitive as it turned out to be.
So you had that platform there to be able to be successful, but whereas you were coming through, you kind of not only try to sort of wing it and figure out how you get over there, where you race, as well as being up against sort of a bit of a doping culture as well. It must have been quite a fascinating period to race and live through as well. Quite interesting to see it firsthand.
Yeah, interesting for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
People talent are going to make it, I think, no matter what. But I think there was some very, very talented riders who just got to, I think always think that crucial age around 18, 19 when riders have learned to drive and there's going out and there's all these other distractions, and there were some amazing juniors, especially just a couple of years before I was a final year junior, who were so competitive but didn't seem to go any further once they turned senior. And yeah, I think the funding was a huge factor in that.
Very difficult. So obviously you're very active in the domestic scene here in the UK. For listeners that are from overseas, I think actually most listeners of the podcast are actually overseas, I think. But tell everyone a little bit about the domestic scene, how it works throughout the year, what are the major events, and how that's also evolved in the last sort of 20 years or so.
So the domestic scene at the highest level has always been it's called the Premier Calendar now. It used to be the Star Trophy, and that's quite interesting that there's so much more funding in the sport now, but the number of these races has just declined, and I think that
really?
for a number of reasons, maybe the cost of the racing and traffic conditions, safety. But I think when the Premier Calendar first came about, there was around 28 dates, and then last year I think there was maybe 8, which is the rounds of the National Trophy, and great races have just disappeared by the wayside. Things like Tour of the Peaks, Tour of the Cotswolds, some real classics. So that's the top level of the sport, and then underneath that you've got what's classed as National B races, and these are your kind of regional open road races, and open to I would say decent amateurs, but anyone with a bit of determination and grit can get to that level to race in Nat Bs, but they can be quite random in that, especially early season, you can find yourself lining up against all the Pro Conti guys who may have just done Pro Challenge Mallorca and what have you. So they're random. They can be incredibly hard, or in the summer when the racing tends to thin out a bit, they're a bit more doable, a bit more competitive for your average rider.
And with regards to the Premier Calendar, I mean, do you think that the success of British riders abroad has almost been detrimental to the domestic scene?
I think it's a difficult one. I think when it was the Star Trophy, and maybe, like you say, before the riders, where there was that clear pathway where riders were going abroad, then probably the strength in depth in the Premiers. Actually, this is different because actually the Premiers now are such professional races, and so as a team, they are incredibly hard. So I would say they were almost more achievable for your average, say, like club first and second cat rider, maybe 15, 20 years ago to be competitive in than they are now. I mean, they really are a good level. And it was interesting, a rider I coached who had raced at World Tour who came back to domestic level, one of the comments he made was that it was very hard racing for him doing Prems, but it was a different style of racing, whereas the bigger races in Europe might be, they're far more controlled. So an early break will go, there'll be teams riding behind, and there'll be a decisive point in the race where the break's likely to go. But for the guys in the Premier Calendar race, it's always a bit different. They're just an attack fest from the start, and you might have to cover like 15 moves or so, and the break can go at any time. There is no clear sort of script to the race, which I think actually makes them pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's an absolute carnage.
Yeah, and brutal.
Yeah, good to watch. Interesting. And when did you start coaching? What part of your career did you start getting into coaching?
So I was coached by. I worked for trainSharp, obviously, but I was coached by John for a number of years, and obviously just John. And John was one of the sort of first companies to really set up and have quite a significant client base, and he was looking for another experienced kind of road rider. And as I'd been coached by him, I started going in a day a week and seeing how the whole company worked, and just John grew the role for me. So I was very fortunate just to be in the right place at the right time.
And you and John go way back. Did you used to race together as well?
Yeah. John won the Sussex Divs way back in the day. I was in the break with him that day, and it ended up with 3 of us, I think. He always had a very fast finish, John. You couldn't take him to the finish. Yeah, he was a good rider.
So the business has grown significantly, and one of the reasons I was quite keen to get you on the podcast is that really you coach a huge array of cyclists, and I think there's often a misconception around coaching. Who would you say should be looking at getting a coach? Who can benefit from getting a coach and coaching? And what are your views just generally in terms of the benefits of working, say, before we get into the more sort of top end competitive coaching, but just for the general cyclist that wants to improve? What should they be looking for, and how can coaching benefit them?
I think for most riders, I mean, this is my personal opinion, cycling's an awful lot more fun when you're fit and you can go out and do longer rides, enjoy them, and not feel like you're on your hands and knees after an hour and a half. So, from riders right the way through, from might be preparing for a sportive, or literally we've got riders who just want to be strong on the club run, or preparing, Zwift racing. Zwift racing is an interesting one. I've had riders in the past who pretty much don't want to ride outdoors in the slightest. This was before lockdown, and just enjoy the indoor racing element. So, the array of riders I think who can benefit from coaching is pretty much anyone, really. And I think some of the factors that are probably the most important are that sense of accountability. Whereas with a cyclist, most of us are quite competitive people, but you do tend to train your strengths quite regularly and do the things that you like doing, rather than maybe what is actually going to make you a better cyclist or make you a stronger, faster cyclist. And I think everyone who gets on a bike quite enjoys that feeling of riding fast. There's nothing quite like it when you're hooning along and feeling at one with the bike and everything flows, and they're the sort of days you really strive for.
And I think absolutely firsthand, I can say that accountability is key. I think many cyclists, they'll be doing various online training programs or just trying to wing it, or just lost their way a little bit with cycling. And I think that's what coaching can give someone in the first instance, is just a bit of structure, a little bit of focus, and a bit of a plan to get to where they want to get to.
That's it. I'm a massive believer in work ethic trumps everything. So consistency of training is everything. And everyone has those days where you get up and maybe you're not quite feeling it, but it's quite a different motivation when you know someone's actually going to be looking at your ride file and more, not so much checking up on you, but it just give that little extra spur just to get the work done. And then there's always that nice feeling of satisfaction when you've completed your session, get home, and think, great, now can relax. I think a lot of cyclists like that sort of reward process where you feel like you can't relax nicely until you've done your training, ticked it off, sit on the sofa with a cup of tea, nailed it.
Exactly, nailed it. There's nowhere to hide, and that's obviously that correlation is correlated with power meters becoming more accessible to pretty much all cyclists now. Everyone can train smarter and have that accountability, and that must really. I was going to ask you what you've seen since you started coaching. How has coaching evolved? And I suppose that data element is the key bit, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So when I first started with John, I mean, it was a case of you would send out an email with a PDF of their week planned out in front of them. And it might be a lot of riders, probably maybe 50-50 were working to heart rate, power, and by no means did everyone have a power meter. And you were prescribing the efforts, but you didn't really have a way of looking at the files and seeing how they were performing the session and be able to give tips. And now I think that's something that's changed a lot and made it so much better and such a better experience for the riders, is using something like we use today's plan. So you can you get set the session, you upload, and straight away you can look at the file, see how you performed the session, ways you could improve it. Did you go out too hard, whatever, during a certain effort? And everything's traceable. So it depends how deep you want to go into the analytics bit. From things like your subjective wellness, your sleep quality, to your mood, etc., your body metrics, weight, and what have you. So everything can be tracked and traced, and all with that best intention of making you fitter and faster, which is the overall goal.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're all aiming for. What would you say? I mean, a lot of sort of self-trained athletes out there that have reached a pretty good level. But what are the sort of major mistakes or the major lessons that you can help with, or you see? What are the major mistakes that you see athletes making on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis?
I would say the first one would be probably not taking their recovery as seriously as you do your training. So it's keeping in mind that you've got to recover to adapt, and everyone needs a rest day. You see a lot of riders just riding absolutely day in, day out, and then you end up in this state of fatigue. And I call this like riding in a grey area, where you're not fresh enough to hit the numbers that are actually going to make some nice positive adaptations. So you're not riding hard enough to create that, but you're not riding easy enough to recover either. So you're just kind of grey area all the time, where you're in a bit of a state of fatigue, and I call that like stale form. So your performance chart tends to look like a very flat line, and you're not really making any improvement. And you feel that yourself in a ride. That's a state, especially during the racing season, that it's quite easy to slip into, because you might be doing a very similar workload week in, week out once the racing starts, and that's where shaping the season for the rider and putting in actual blocks of rest or overload weeks really comes in.
Yeah, I think that's so key, right? I mean, I think managing obviously your training in terms of executing the sessions you need to do, and then the recovery and sleep critical as well, right? And then your stress off the bike if you've got a day-to-day job and a family and stuff. Getting the equilibrium across everything is so difficult, which is why I think having a coach that you can bounce ideas or communicate with is a little bit more flexible. Are you constantly sort of tweaking things for your athletes in terms of if they're having a bit of a rough time off the bike, or then not sleeping well, or
yeah, for sure.
Is it
that's pretty much what my entire day job is. So, for example, this morning, someone who did a ride on the weekend when actually it wasn't supposed to be a hard ride, but it turned into a hard ride, and she was saying she felt tired, and she started her warm up this morning. And there's a fine line between riding yourself into the session and knowing when you're going to put, you're not going to achieve the numbers, and you're probably going to put yourself in a deeper hole. So, they just get a quick call on the phone, and we rearrange the week a little bit. And we made today a recovery spin, and we'll have a go at the session tomorrow. It's that kind of thing. Rearranging the week, trying to get the most out of the week for a particular rider.
Yeah, it's a constant feedback loop, isn't it? It's constantly trying to push yourself, but also remain fresh enough to push yourself for the next, at the right times and the right stages of the week, isn't it? And you've been working with a number of elite athletes as well. It'd be fascinating to get an idea of in their numbers, what they look like, and how do you identify sort of top end talent at such a young age?
At a young age, the testing at the HQ is quite well. That's a very good guide. So it can be a thing of, obviously I go to a lot of races myself, and sometimes I'll do a race and there might be a junior with dispensation riding, and straight away you just think that someone will really impress you. And I might say to John, tell him about him and say, oh, man, this kid really impressed me. And we might even reach out and say, are you working with anyone? Are you interested in working with anyone? From that process, we might get the rider into the HQ. We'll do a series of physiological testing, see just where they're at, and that can give us a good guide into where they are in terms of what we think their potential is, what we think their potential strengths and weaknesses are. I mean, the riders themselves usually have a pretty good idea of what they consider their strengths and weaknesses. It's quite interesting to see whether the tests back that up. Yeah. And a good question for a rider is always, if you could win a race, or what do you think is your best way of winning a race, or your best chance with your physical attributes? And hearing from them what they consider to be their best way, then you can give a lot more advice.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because actually, I think sometimes the fitter you get, you get to know yourself better as an athlete as well. When do you start tailoring the training towards the specific athlete? So if you've picked up a young sprinter, do you start sort of building that strength from an early age, or are you just trying to build their broader endurance and their just all-round cycling ability? When do you really start focusing on where cyclists see themselves, or where you see them going?
On how their results are going at that particular time, because you might have, say, someone come into the lab and they'll do an amazing sprint on the indoor erg, and you think, wow, man, you should have so much confidence that if the race comes down to a group finish or a sprint from a small breakaway, you should be really, really confident, and you could lead it out, and if you can reproduce these numbers. But obviously, then from the racing results, it's no good having a really good sprint if you're not there to use it, not there in at the finish. So it could be, say, for a certain rider, building the engine, building that threshold power, sustainable efforts that are going to see them maybe make the selections and be able to use that sprint finish.
Yeah.
I mean, let's say it's so individual, and you see some riders maybe who are very physically mature their age, especially say at that junior level, and they'll come in and you think, you can see why they'll be very, very successful at those younger age groups, because they're almost like it's like men competing against boys. And it does tend to even out, obviously, as they get older. But that bit's quite difficult to predict, that sort of who's going to keep on progressing and keep making improvements year on year.
And that must make it one of the most satisfying jobs, and probably almost the most frustrating jobs in the world as well. You've got an athlete that on paper, in terms of numbers, should be doing X, yet there's do you see the psychological element? Do you work with athletes on that side of things, race tactics, or just belief as well, right? Just believing in themselves.
And this can be another good thing of actually, myself personally, I like when I do races, that when I'm actually racing with the riders, because you actually get to see what they're like and how they react in races, and or usually more how proactive they are. And there's some riders I coach, and their numbers are really, really good, and their fitness levels are good, and then you're riding a race and you'll see a move start to go up the road, and you almost have to give them a little nudge and say,
get in it.
You need to be there. And there's just crucial moments in races when, and that is I think experience can really come in, where you just get a sense that everyone's a little bit tired, the attacks have been going and going and going, and maybe at the next one's, you just get a feeling the race is going to split now. And every race is like that. There'll be that certain moment where it's almost like that's one attack, and then there's almost like a switch off because everyone's knackered. That's the group that's rolling off the road. But a lot of the time, it's just having that mental strength to keep going with them, believing in yourself, and keep going with the moves. And
that's really experience as well, though, right? I mean, do you feel that experience with your racing now? It must give you such an advantage.
Oh yeah, for myself, yeah, because my numbers are probably going down, and I think as you get older. Actually, I say my numbers are going down, but it's the explosive elements that you lose as you get older, and you just learn to race in a different way, and it makes you. I think it's quite good because you get a lot more calculating about how you're going to say go across to moves and what have you, rather than waiting and doing a massive effort up a climb. Generally, there's always going to be it's looking for the lulls in the races and just doing those little sneak off moves, and they actually work really well. Use your cunning as you get older. Rely less on the legs.
Yeah, exactly. And do you have athletes all around the world? How does sort of talk through how an athlete would work with you, or how you work with an athlete? Is it?
Yeah, we have. So, I mean, as a company, we have riders literally all over the world. I coach a young girl out in the United Arab Emirates, and so that relationship, I think that came initially from. I think that was a message over Instagram, actually, then some phone calls, and she's really keen to race. And so the process of a rider starting with us, that's usually how it works. You have initial contact, followed by a phone call, and really listening there, you're trying to establish where they are and where they want to get to and what their ultimate dream is in cycling, and try and figure out a little bit about them as their strengths and weaknesses. And then usually I'd start with a set of block of training and maybe a test effort. And for most riders, getting them into that nice sort of structured routine, and then you can start to work out a little bit more about them and what makes them tick, especially when you start to see race files and what have you.
And do you work with your riders from a nutrition perspective as well? Is that something that you feel that a lot of riders are asking you around weight management, or you asking them to manage their weight?
I mean, a lot of riders. I mean, I'm not a sports nutritionist, but I think I can give some pretty decent advice. And I think one of the best bits of advice is not to make things too complicated. And you can make things way more complex than they need to be, and it's keeping when you're eating clean and you're eating sensibly, and the bits like timing is probably the most important kind of advice. Finding a routine and almost sticking to what works for you. So on race day, that might be I always try and say have your last solids 3 hours before, sip on your carb drink, and working out what say if you've got confidence in a particular breakfast, whatever that might be, whether that's your oats or whether that might be eggs and rice or whatever it might be before a big race, then once you're happy with it, just stick to what you know, and you're not going to have an upset stomach, and you're not going to feel empty, and working out giving the nutrition advice in the race. I think that's a real big thing that riders tend to forget a little bit about, especially when the adrenaline's flowing and they're into the race. Is just keep getting fuel in the tank. If you want to be strong in the final hour, then you need to keep getting the gels down. You're getting the bars down you early on and stoke the fires, basically.
Do you have a set timing with eating during races, or it depends on the race, I suppose? But what do you generally advise to people how often they should be eating and what they should be eating?
Well, yeah. So you most riders, you'd be looking to get around 80 grams, 75, 80 grams of carb in per hour. And when you look at that in real terms, that's probably a bottle, a bar, and a gel. And there's some new products in the market that are maybe higher carb content, although they can be a little bit, I find, a bit funny on the stomach. So it's just that bit of work out. There's different manufacturers of gels might have a different amount of carbohydrate in, and same with drinks, and you might find that if you try and get too much in, then you do get those stomach cramps and what have you. So key thing for riders is to try things in training before they're going to try it in racing. But for most guys, it's just a mental reminder to say okay, you need to get down a gel down you, and maybe half a bar per hour or whatever it might be, once we've worked out what product they're using, and really drilling that into them to practice that in training as well as racing.
It's so key, and it's so easy to forget when you are racing.
Yeah, I would say one of the things for myself personally that took me a long time to realise just how important that was. And I always used to think it was a fitness thing that was maybe might be lacking a little bit in the last hour race. But get the nutrition right, and it's game changer.
Slight segue in topic now. I'd be really interested to get your view, given the current situation, on this year's Tour de France from a coaching perspective. So it looks like the tour might be happening, or certainly it's scheduled to happen at the end of, is it August?
I think so. Yeah. There's a very busy calendar, isn't there, Plan?
Yeah, crazy calendar. But just looking at the tour, it's quite unprecedented to have a race where all riders will be arriving on the start line fresh with no racing in the legs. And some have been riding outside and some have been stuck on the turbo. I mean, just from a coaching physiological perspective, how do you think it will impact the race? What are you excited? I think it could make for a fascinating race, right? I mean, what are your views on it?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking it could either go two ways. In that either the riders are going to be super conservative and say leave any attacks till very late on the final climb, or it could maybe go the other way, or it could be a bit of a smash fest with riders really going for it and then paying the price the next day. On the other side of that, I was thinking these guys, say like your Geraint Thomases, all the GC leaders, they're going to have their data going back for years, their training data, and whether they're racing or not, you look at how they know where they need to be and what sort of markers in form they'll be looking for to reach a certain day. So I saw like Geraint Thomas had flown out. I think he flew out to France yesterday. And that does give them, obviously, they'll know the load he needs to do and the hours and the intensity to get him into pretty damn similar condition to his tour-winning form. So it'd be interesting. I think I'm not that sure the lack of racing is going to have that big an effect, because basically it's the training. The training is where you make the gains. And you do need maybe, I think the racing for a lot of the time, for a lot of the riders, probably isn't actually as hard as their training sessions they're going to be doing. Yeah. Be interesting.
But I see your point, and you're almost arriving in perfect condition. But ultimately, we've seen year after year, first week of the tour is always sketchy. There are always crashes, and I think there might be even more given no one's been racing for 3 or 4 months.
I mean, it's the one thing with lockdown, I think it's really made me appreciate how much the professional racing calendar shapes you do. You really look forward to spring, love the spring classics, and then you and it's like your markers in the year, and it's the bit I've absolutely missed the most out of lockdown, and out of watching my cycling.
Yeah, exactly. With no pro sport, I don't know. It just feels like you're treading water.
No racing,
exactly.
No pro sport on the telly. Oh, life's boring.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of, you mentioned lockdown, it's obviously pretty frustrating for a lot of racers and cyclists from around the world. What are your favourite races in the calendar that you're missing this year, or potentially missing this year?
So I love the Strada Bianchi, the Cobble Classics, and probably something like Tour Lombardy. I do enjoy the one day races more. I like it where everything's on the line on the day. The Worlds are always fantastic. It's good. I think especially the Worlds, watching a race develop over a circuit's really interesting dynamic. So like the Worlds, also seeing like the under 23s and the junior races, I always think they're brilliant.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, super aggressive riding. So hopefully we're still.
Were you up in Harrogate last year? Did you make it to Harrogate last year?
I didn't actually make it. No, I watched every race fully live on the TV on stream, but I didn't actually get there. Which has the weather. Yeah, I mean the weather made it very very good, didn't it? I've been to a few over the years, Belgium and France.
It's a great week, isn't it? It's the first one I've been to. Absolutely brilliant watching. I loved actually the junior races, under 23s. I have to say the men's elite, I was bloody freezing in the rain. It was a miserable old day.
That did look epically hard. I mean, the women's race was amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah, fantastic. Amazing race.
I get a little bit of criticism maybe from abroad, but I mean, I thought the races were I thought it was fantastic. The whole week, that was brilliant. I mean, they can't do anything. The weather, obviously, that's just what it was, isn't it? But I thought the courses they designed were brilliant.
Oh, that circuit, well, I'm sure most of the world's done it now on Zwift, but it's a tough old circuit to race around 17 times or whatever as well.
Really? Yeah, some serious elevation game. Heavy road.
Yeah, exactly. And on a personal level, what races are you gutted to be missing this year?
I like the early season race. So I got 2 races in, but I always enjoy like they're more local, obviously regional races to me, but things like the Wally Gimber Trophy, they're just good level national Bs, and the National Masters road race was a little bit of a target again this year because that was on way up north at Hull, and on a very hard circuit. I really enjoyed that last year, so I don't think that's going to run, and that was due to be in July, but maybe the following year. Yeah,
what's the current status? Are we still waiting to see timing wise, or it looks like racing's done for the year?
Like Cycling Time Trials, which is the national body for time trialing in the UK, they've released a sort of revised calendar with most of the national champs dates in September, October. So, and I really think that will happen. And I think realistically we might be looking late August maybe for some road racing. We'll see. I guess we just got to see like that's the bit of the problem for the racing cyclists and keeping the racing cyclists motivated at the moment. When you have it in mind, then it's so much easier to have that motivation, that focus to say this is why you're getting on the trainer, or this is why you're doing this particular ride, and having that sort of mental image of racing. Whereas when you don't have that and it's all a bit of a grey area, then not so much so. But a lot of riders say the last week or so have started mentioning cyclocross already. So I think
I was just going to ask you that.
I think it's going to be a very busy cross season, and we've got the Crawley Willies are promoting the Cross Nationals this year, which is very local to us. So I think that's going to be hugely popular this year.
Yeah, I bet. That was my next question to say. I bet most of your athletes are looking at cross for the winter, because it's difficult, right? If you've had your summer season written off, you want to race towards something. But so how are you tweaking Are you tweaking programs accordingly to get riders potentially ready for cross, or is it a bit early yet?
It's a bit early yet, but say like some riders maybe just be doing it for the first time. They've got a bike. There's a particular rider in mind, and then it's just a case of getting, maybe they're in their midweek endurance ride. We say head out on the cross bike, go to the woods, and just get used to the feel of the bike and practice your skills. It's a hugely technical sport as well as physical, so being confident on the bike is going to be a massive thing. But then a bit later, probably more like August time, if depending on what the calendar starts to look like, that by then we might start to think about more specific cyclocross, actual specific sessions.
Yeah, what does that look like? Just have interest. A lot of sort of shorter effort as well. A lot of long, high intensity.
To doing what you might do for a crit, but overgeared. It's a different kind of effort from what, say, like punching out of a corner in a crit to a cyclocross, because generally it's going to be much slower in a bigger gear, so really torquey. Yeah, and that sort of over-unders, 15 efforts and what have you. Yeah.
And do you got clients down in Australia as well?
I don't personally, but one of the other coaches at trainSharp does. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking, given where they're at going into the winter, it's probably a good time for anyone listening in Australia to reach out if they want to put a structured winter program together. For hopefully racing next spring.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Your summer fitness, that's all built over the winter.
And in terms of your favourite places to ride outside the UK, where are your favourite places to travel? What do you look for?
I went to Luca last year to visit an ex-trainSharp coach who's now working with Dimension Data, NTT now. And he's based out there, and that was amazing. The roads, I think I was very lucky with the weather as well. I didn't see a cloud in the sky for the full week, but the terrain out there I thought was amazing. It's just picture postcard views and every ride, and I love that. Mallorca's great. We did a training camp with the team I rode for, Noon Sig, out in Kelpe at the start of last year, and I was super impressed out there. I don't know why I didn't have in mind the roads would be as scenic or as varied as what they were. So you can see why so many of the teams head out there in the early season. So, anyway, nice sunshine.
Yeah, it's become a huge hub, actually, hasn't it, for cycling full stop?
Yeah, it's the place to go now. I think the climate's that bit more consistent, and there's a really good variety of rides. So if you want to head to fairly flattish circuits and do specific drills, then you can do it without having to slog up mountains every day, which isn't always the most. It's a good training.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's nice for me. Obviously, I've been in Asia for 9 years, so I'm sort of rediscovering some of the cycling hotspots in Europe, which is great. And with lockdown going on at the moment, what are your views with regards? You mentioned your team there, but I think it's a very difficult time for all cycling pro teams, the World Tour particularly. Do you think this is an opportunity that maybe the sport can look to restructure, and do you have any views on how that might work? Or because I think it's a very difficult time for the sport.
I was just messaging a couple of weeks back one of the guys who runs one of the big domestic teams over here, and asking how his sponsors have been with him and where they're being supportive. And you can understand, obviously, if the sponsors had to put their staff on furlough, then they're going to be making cutbacks. And I think that the teams that are really proactive on social media and looking for other ways to get publicity are the ones who are going to survive. I mean, it's going to be tough times for sure, isn't it? But I think that there's guys like the NTT actually, really like Victor Kempenarts on YouTube, and the guys who are very engaging and offer something that's okay. So you're not able to race, you're not able to promote your sponsor in the usual way, but you can still engage with the public and advertise the products you use and say why you like them. And I think that's probably way more important than ever at the moment, to be able to still give some value to the sponsors. Long term, with the actual racing calendar, I mean, cycling's a kind of a very unusual model in sports anyway, isn't it? With the sponsors and not having that.
It's so reliant on the sponsors, isn't it? It's makes it almost impossible to plan. You almost need you need
even at the highest
something like
level. It just seems to be almost like a year by year, hand to mouth sort of survival, rather than so like how a football club might operate. And you can really see why I think it was Jonathan Walters saying about building a fan base for a particular team. It's why it's so difficult in cycling, because the sponsor might change in a year's time, and then the shirt design might
colours change, name change. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so it's quite difficult.
and that,
where other sports would have that fan base, whereas in cycling it's much more probably about the fans like a particular rider, and they're not that fussed about really maybe what team he rides for. And
that's what I always thought.
The team completely, but the fan is still going to like that rider or support that rider rather than the actual team. But as a business model, that's obviously pretty hard.
It's difficult. Yeah, there needs to be an alternative revenue stream. That's why I always thought there should be some sort of platform whereby you can offer a revenue stream to the World Tour teams. I know there's the Velon a little bit. I think GCN doing more with Eurosport now. But if you could basically, like Rugby Pass, I don't know if you follow rugby, but that is an app where people subscribe to, and you can watch matches, you can get highlights. But if you could build something like that would offer a revenue stream to the pro teams, that would just make them a little less reliant on sponsorship, because it's so difficult being so reliant on sponsorship. I read somewhere, and sorry, I can't remember where it was, that I think Mitchelton Scott got better publicity by not racing Paris-Nice and doing Zwift rides instead. They got far more column inches. Their sponsors were happier with them not even racing it, which is just nonsensical, right? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but then it's like their backstage pass videos and the YouTube channels like EF Alternative Calendar. I thought stuff like that engages with the public really well. I mean,
it does, yeah.
Long term for a sponsor, they're doing like a minor race in Belgium and being in the top 10. That's kind of irrelevant in the terms of like global coverage. But a rider who's very engaging and has that nice personality in front of the camera, then that's you can see why that's a real worthwhile asset. And you can see that even in the UK domestic scene, there's various riders who might have like a YouTube channel and are very good at that kind of self promotion. You can see why they've got a value to a team.
To add to it. Yeah, no, I do get that. And what are your views? You mentioned that, you've got athletes that you're coaching specifically for Zwift or online platforms. What are your views of virtual racing? Is it something you've tried? Do you enjoy it? Do you think there's any future in it from a professional standpoint?
I think it's been an absolute godsend for the riders during lockdown. There's just to be able to get that little bit of competition. I mean, it's been hugely popular. It's something I must admit I'm not massively into myself, but that's maybe just because I've been racing an awful long time and don't feel the need to absolutely rinse myself on a trainer in a race. I've raced more than enough. And so again, going back to that thing with at the moment with the pro teams, it's still giving them a chance to get some exposure. They were showing the race at the Alpe d'Huez Zwift live on Eurosport on Saturday, both the ladies and men's. And to be fair, it was pretty decent. The GCN did a good job of presenting it. I think it's a definite, obviously very safe environment, and it's a very good alternative to racing. It's never gonna I don't think replace or be a rival for real racing, because part of what racing is all about is, as much as the athletic achievement, is I always think overcoming the environment and the road in front of you. So then you've got the skill factor as well. But as a substitute, I guess it's like rowing on the erg and rowing circles, isn't it? It's an athletic achievement as much as without so much of the skill set. But yeah, Zwift is a different one, isn't it? Because you've got to actually learn how to race on Zwift and use the power ups and get used to that.
I think there's some skills to it, isn't there? There's a whole different world, but
appreciate.
Those guys have done very well out of lockdown, no doubt.
That's probably benefited the most. It'd be like the producers of smart trainers and Zwift must have done very well.
Yeah, I think most places sold out of smart trainers. Can't get them for love or money now. I'd say the rides I have done outside, that's one of the good things I have noticed. Just so many people out on their bikes. People have pulled their bikes out of sheds that have been there since mid-90s, or maybe even earlier, since when you started racing. But it's nice to see so many people riding.
I was talking to John about this and saying maybe obviously lockdown is a worrying time for a business owner, and it is uncertain times. So I said maybe as a silver lining, it reminded me 2012 when Brad won the Tour and the Olympics, and I think we just see just so many people out on their bikes. So long term, it could just be that one of those another nice little spikes that really bring the sport on. We've been very lucky in the UK with pretty much since lockdown. The weather's been lovely and the roads are quiet. So it's the first time years and years, like I remember seeing actual families out on the bike. And you might have like a 4-year-old and mum and dad, and obviously they're confident enough that roads aren't too busy that they can actually go out and enjoy it.
Yeah, it's great to see. I've loved seeing that, actually, to be fair. And I was going to ask you, you mentioned John there. In terms of the lab, what kind of testing stuff do you have there? And can anyone just sort of come down and test where they're at with stuff?
Yeah. Anyone can book in for a test. So we have an SRM bike. I'm not one of the sports scientists myself, so I'm not going to get too technical, but we do the sort of gold standard test is a MAP test, which is doing a ramp test to exhaustion. We'd usually do a blood lactate step test as a warm-up, because you're only really going to go up just above threshold for that. That's always quite an interesting one. We have the VO2 masks that give you VO2 values, and then depending on what the rider goals are. I mean, there's a few tests we do, but yeah, anyone can book in. For an hour of torture, then it's the place to be.
Yeah. Sounds horrific. No, it sounds awesome. And if people want to get hold of you or have any questions, what we'll do to get your email and website and all the information they need into the show notes, and they can just reach out directly and you'll fix the time to have a chat around what maybe you guys can do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, be happy to speak to anyone.
So you're taking on new clients at the moment. You're still growing the business.
We have a team of coaches at trainSharp. So, I mean, how the process would normally work, John would. Most riders would speak to John first, and then he'd assign a coach who he thinks would be best to work with. Or you can ask for a particular coach if there's someone you particularly want to work with. So, it'd be a case of contact myself or John, and we could have a chat.
Is there anything else I've missed that I should have critically asked you, or is there anything else you want to tell everyone?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered most things. No.
Yeah, it's been a great chat. Thank you very much for joining me. I need to go get on the turbo now. What have I got today?
You're leaving the trainings late in the day, so you've got to get on and earn your dinner.
Yeah, I know. It's been a busy day, but I've got threshold pushing duration build today.
Ah, beautiful. I love that.
That should be fun. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll make sure anyone who's got any questions gets in touch. And good luck with the rest of lockdown. And when the season kicks off, good luck with that. And hopefully we'll get you back on to come and have a chat with us again.
Lovely. Good to chat to you, Jules.
Cheers, Chris. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast. And more importantly, don't forget to download the Unfound app and join cyclists from around the world on the Hub. We'll see you on there.